So yeah, I've thought about true nature a bit lately, I guess. That's why I'm having the topic, I suppose. But maybe I'll just read this again, and I'll read what the author has to say about it, because this book is haikus and then the author's take on it. So there's some pretty interesting stuff in what she says. So, how easily it glows, how easily it dims, the firefly. It's by Chine Jo, Japanese name. So she writes, of all the words of my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, I remember these often repeated words the most. Don't be afraid to be yourself, who you are. Actually, he was defining how we can be our own brave selves in the world. How much easier it seems for the firefly to brighten and extinguish than for us to trust ourselves and be ourselves. Of course, try as we might, ultimately we cannot do otherwise, so the joke is really on us. Being oneself is related to being relaxed with oneself and not being embarrassed with oneself. A trust in our basic nature, which on the absolute level is as luminous as the light of the firefly. Yet a luminosity that is sometimes dimmed by our own self-doubt, self-hatred, and confusion. The firefly is following its nature of being a firefly, true to itself, and with inner courage and trust. With inner courage and trust we can also do as Shakespeare's Hamlet was admonished to do, to thine own self be true. In this particular haiku, since it is the poet's death haiku, she is reflecting on life's impermanence as well as how easily the firefly accepts its life and death and just beingness in between. Living gracefully, living true. She lived 1660 to 1688, 28 years. So yeah, there's some things that kind of stick out to me. Be our own brave selves in the world, one. And try as we might, ultimately we cannot do otherwise than be our own true selves. So the paradox, there's lots of paradoxes. That's what I enjoy, So, yeah. So in Buddhism, they talk about the 5 aggregates, which are the 5 things, piles of things that essentially we are not. So this is kind of how the Buddha is teaching, his teaching of no self or not self. As the Buddha didn't actually say that there's no such thing as a self. He said that you can't point to anything that is the self. And he listed these 5 things as things that we may perceive as that's me, but in reality, they're not. So the body, our bodies are not ourselves. The feeling tone, or whether we like or dislike something, perceptions, mental formations, thinking, for example, or like a mental state of happiness or frustration, and consciousness, just pure consciousness, is not necessarily us either, because that comes and goes. We're asleep, we're not conscious. So there's that, which is true. But then at the same time, I guess I feel like in my practice that I get a taste of this experience of my true nature sometimes. And it can happen especially if I'm leading and I'm doing a guided meditation, I might get this experience of things are just flowing through me, and I'm not getting in the way. And I don't think that's not isolated to meditation necessarily. It's, artists, musicians talk about that, right? Somebody's doing a solo, guitar solo or trumpet or whatever, and they're not thinking necessarily about it. It's just all kind of coming from somewhere through their body and out of the instrument. And I guess what's interesting about it is, it depends on the person. Miles Davis is going to do a different solo than Paul McCartney or somebody else. And, athletes talk about it too. So it's something about this melting away of our hindrances, I suppose, the 5 hindrances, and allowing just the universe, the now to just come through us. So it's not us, but it's also not us. It's not completely separate from us, because somehow it's coming through us, coming through our bodies and through our synapses. There's this Dogen poem, which I wrote down somewhere, but I don't know where I put it. If I can find it quickly. It goes, just hearing, without extra mind that grasps, the jewel-like raindrops dripping from the eaves are myself. So just hearing, without extra mind that grasps, the jewel-like raindrops dripping from the eaves are myself. So you can imagine he's just sitting there listening to the raindrops hitting the roof, and it's just, he gets to this point of there's no Dogen, there's no guy listening to the raindrops anymore. It's just the sound of the raindrops. That's all there is. And so it's merged into one. There's no longer a hearer and the heard. It's just the sound only. And that sound is himself. Does that make any sense? Yeah. And I should, I might be all over the place a little bit with this. I try to collimate everything. I don't know how well I do. So there's this kind of basic underlying true self that we seem to have. But then there's also, on top of it, we layer up these things like society tells us we have to act in this way, and we kind of warp our actions and the things we say and do to sort of conform with society. Men can't cry, right? Things like that. You can't express your true emotions sometimes because there's outside restrictions in place, or at least we allow those restrictions to change how we act. So I guess the paradox that I wonder about So it's the true nature of the firefly to glow and dim. It's the true nature of the cheetah to catch the antelope and kill it, and it's the antelope dies. And I remember watching this video, this nature video, this deer or antelope that got caught by a predator, and it's got it by the neck, and the deer is laying on the ground, and it just looks peaceful, like, okay, I've been caught, it's over. He's not thrashing around, his eyes aren't big and wide, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. He's just dying. So that's their nature, that's the true nature of animals to be like this, is the true nature of the firefly. So is it our true nature? What is our true nature? Is it, we're given these mental tools to think and to act and to react to situations and predict and plan. And then we use them and we act like it's wrong, and it brings us suffering. There's no doubt about it. To get lost and unable to get out of our heads and all these thoughts that we have. But isn't that our true nature too? To do that. So I guess that's like the central paradox it's been probably thought about for thousands of years, but it's like, where does it go wrong? Where does it become wrong? I was walking around in the woods the other day, and I saw this leaf on the ground and all chewed up with holes in it from caterpillars or some other bugs, or just decay from a fungus or something. Obviously there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a leaf hanging out on the ground. There's nothing wrong with us when we're born, babies. There's nothing wrong with the neurons firing around in our brain, but at some point somewhere we decide that, oh, that's bad, that's causing suffering. So maybe it is our true nature to be born to suffer a whole lot our whole lives thinking about crap, and then to die afraid, like, oh God, I wasted my life. And actually, I think there is some sort of poignancy to that, if I can articulate it. So, the firefly brightens and dims, right? It's not like saying, oh yay, I'm brightening, and oh darn, I'm dimming, which is life and death. That's kind of a metaphor for being born and dying, impermanence. It's not grasping to one thing and being aversive towards the other. So maybe part of the problem is that we're grasping towards non-suffering. We want non-suffering, and we don't want suffering. So when suffering arises, we don't want it. We fight against it, and therefore we're not at peace with the way things are, with the present moment. So the very act of wanting to be free of suffering kind of is the cause of the suffering. So it's a noble desire to be free of suffering. That's what brings everyone to Buddhism, to meditation in the first place. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind that the only way to actually become free of suffering is to face it head on and really feel it 100%. And of course, Zen Buddhism is full of all these paradoxes. The only way to be free of suffering is to suffer, I guess. I think I've mentioned this before, but there's Thich Nhat Hanh does a talk. It's called On Loneliness. It's on YouTube, and he'll go through. He goes through right view and wrong view, and all the things that follow from it. And right view leads to. Wrong view leads to dualistic and discriminative thinking. It leads to believing there is birth and death, there is an actor and a thing being acted upon, so on and so on, which leads to suffering, samsara, at the end. And then he goes through starting at right view, there's no birth, no death. There's no actor, no thing being acted upon. There's interbeing, everything is. And then he goes towards the end and says, and there is no samsara, there's no suffering. So it's like there's no movement involved. You don't have to go anywhere to get from suffering to not suffering. It's just a change in perspective. I thought that was quite interesting. I guess another part of what I wanted to talk about with the whole true nature thing was just as the practice goes on, and I get more of a sense of what's lying underneath all the thinking, and for me anyway, there are these aspirations that start to come up. And it's a lot of goodwill that I don't know exactly where to direct. But, it feels great to be leading and to be sort of feeling like I'm at one with what I feel like is my true nature. You call it like a calling or something. For me personally, I have all these ideas about, I have this dream of opening a center for children, like a play center, indoor playground type thing. But just this aspiration of giving comes up for me. Giving, being present for people. And somehow that feels more like that's really me than going to work 40 hours a week at my job and doing all the things that I have to do to maintain the life I currently live. And maybe I'm deluding myself in some way. I don't know. Maybe I'm way off base, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like there's some sort of resonance going on with the way maybe my life should be lived is coming into view, or maybe the way I want to live my life has shifted now that I've started with meditation. Maybe my true nature has changed from 10 years ago, and now things are off a little bit, and the way I'm living my life is not in alignment with how I should be living my life. And I can feel that more and more, and going to my job and getting all frazzled and stressed out and coming back, and then my days off I go and meditate and walk in the woods, and gosh, I'm how many years do I have left to live, and I'm not in alignment with what the universe wants for me, what I want for myself. So it brings me to this other poem, this Mary Oliver poem called The Journey. It says, "One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble, and you felt the old tug at your ankles. 'Mend my life,' each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late. It was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save." So I like that, especially that bit about the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds. It's pretty beautiful. Yeah. Sheets of clouds, like the layer of muck that, and maybe fear and all these things that other people say you can and can't do, and expectations that are on you, and then slowly and gradually the stars burn through that, and you see what maybe a more noble cause for your life, something you can do with the one chance you have to live. I guess that's about all I've got. So, any ideas on what to do next? Could try and do a guided meditation. I thought it might be nice to walk outside a little bit, since there's nature outside. This is about true nature. Do that. We're going to sit for a few minutes first. I could do a little guided meditation first, and then we can walk outside. So, all right. Let's see how it goes.